Hannibal Barca was born in 247 BC in the ancient city of Carthage, located in what is now Tunisia, North Africa. He would become one of the greatest military commanders in the history of mankind. His name continues to resonate through the ages. As a symbol of tactical genius, determination, and audacity, Hannibal belonged to the Barcid family, a powerful Carthaginian dynasty. His father, Hamilcar Barca, was a renowned general who fought in the First Punic War against Rome. An early age, Hannibal was exposed to military life, and the hatred his people felt toward the growing Roman Republic. According to ancient sources, when Hannibal was just 9 years old, his father made him swear eternal enmity against Rome. This oath would shape the rest of his life and lead to one of the most dramatic military campaigns in ancient history. The rivalry between Carthage and Rome was intense. Both powers sought dominance over the Mediterranean Sea, and its lucrative trade routes. The First Punic War had ended in defeat for Carthage, and the city was forced to pay heavy tribute to Rome. Hamilcar Barca never accepted this humiliation, and he passed his resentment to his son. After the First Punic War, Hamilcar took his family to the Iberian Peninsula, where he established Carthaginian control over much of modern-day Spain. Hannibal grew up in this environment, learning the art of war and developing his strategic mind. When his father died, Hannibal eventually took command of Carthaginian forces in Iberia. He was only 26 years old, but he had already proven himself as a capable and ambitious leader. Hannibal expanded Carthaginian territory in Iberia and prepared for the conflict he knew was inevitable: war with Rome. The city of Saguntum, an ally of Rome located south of the Ebro River, became the flashpoint. Hannibal laid siege to the city, and after 8 months it fell. This act was considered a violation of treaties between Carthage and Rome. The Romans demanded that Carthage hand over Hannibal, but the Carthaginian Senate refused. War was declared, and the Second Punic War began in 218 BC. Hannibal made a decision that would shock the ancient world and change military history forever. Instead of waiting for the Romans to attack Carthage or fighting them in Iberia, he decided to invade Italy itself. This was an audacious plan that required crossing the Pyrenees Mountains, marching through Gaul, and then traversing the Alps, one of the most formidable natural barriers in Europe. But the most astonishing aspect of Hannibal's plan was his decision to bring war elephants with him. These massive creatures were the ancient equivalent of tanks, symbols of power and instruments of psychological warfare. The sight and sound of elephants could terrify enemy soldiers and horses, causing chaos on the battlefield. Hannibal understood the value of these animals, and he was determined to use them against Rome. Elephants had been used in warfare for centuries, particularly in the armies of the Hellenistic kingdoms that emerged after the death of Alexander the Great. Carthage had access to African forest elephants, a now extinct subspecies that was smaller than the African bush elephants we know today, but still formidable in battle. These elephants were captured and trained specifically for military purposes. Hannibal assembled an army of approximately 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. The exact number of elephants varies according to different ancient sources, but most historians agree on this figure. The army was composed of various ethnic groups, including Libyans, Numidians, Iberians, Celts, and Carthaginians themselves. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge, requiring Hannibal to be not only a military tactician, but also a skilled leader who could unite different peoples under a common cause. The journey began in the spring of 218 BC. Hannibal's army marched from New Carthage in Iberia, heading north toward the Pyrenees. The crossing of these mountains was difficult, but manageable. The real test would come later. As the army moved through Gaul, Hannibal faced resistance from some Gallic tribes, but he also secured alliances with others who were hostile to Rome. These alliances were crucial for obtaining supplies and guides for the treacherous journey ahead. By the time Hannibal reached the Rhone River, his army had already been reduced by desertions and skirmishes. The crossing of the Rhone was a significant challenge, especially for the elephants. Ancient historians describe how the Carthaginians built rafts covered with earth to trick the elephants into thinking they were still on solid ground. Some elephants panicked and fell into the water, but most managed to swim across using their trunks as snorkels. This episode demonstrated Hannibal's ingenuity and determination. After crossing the Rhone, Hannibal learned that a Roman army under the consul Publius Cornelius Scipio was approaching. He decided to avoid a direct confrontation at this stage, and instead pressed on toward the Alps. The decision to cross the Alps in late autumn was risky. The mountain passes would soon be blocked by snow, and the conditions would be harsh, but Hannibal believed that speed and surprise were essential to his strategy. The exact route Hannibal took through the Alps remains a subject of debate among historians. Several passes have been proposed, including the Col de Clapier, the Col de Montgenever, and the Col du Mont Cenis. What is certain is that the crossing was a nightmare. The army faced freezing temperatures, treacherous paths, avalanches, and attacks from hostile mountain tribes. The narrow paths were often blocked by rock slides, and the soldiers had to clear the way by hand. In some cases, they used fire and vinegar to crack the rocks, a method described by the ancient historian Livy, though modern scholars debate its effectiveness. The elephants suffered greatly during the crossing. The cold, whether the lack of food and the difficult terrain, took a heavy toll on these magnificent animals. Ancient sources tell us that many elephants died in the mountains. Some fell from cliffs, others succumbed to starvation or cold. The handlers, known as mahouts, did everything they could to keep the animals alive. But the conditions were brutal by the time Hannibal emerged from the Alps into the Po Valley in northern Italy. His army had been drastically reduced. He had lost nearly half his men, and most of his elephants. Only a handful of these great beasts survived the crossing yet. Despite these losses, Hannibal had achieved something remarkable. He had brought an army, including war elephants, into Italy through a route the Romans considered impossible. The psychological impact of Hannibal's arrival in Italy cannot be overstated. The Romans were shocked that an enemy army had appeared in their homeland. The presence of war elephants added to the terror. These creatures were unlike anything most Roman soldiers had ever seen. The sight of elephants charging into battle, their tusks and trunks swinging their massive bodies trampling everything in their path, was enough to break the morale of even the most disciplined troops. Hannibal's first major engagement in Italy was the Battle of the Trebia in December 218 BC. The Roman consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus commanded an army of approximately 40,000 men. Hannibal had about 30,000 troops, and he still had some of his war elephants. Hannibal chose the battlefield carefully. He positioned his army near the Trebia River and set it. Trapped. The Romans, eager for battle, crossed the icy river and attacked Hannibal's center. But this was exactly what Hannibal wanted. As the Romans advanced, Hannibal's cavalry and hidden troops attacked from the flanks. The elephants were deployed to maximize their psychological impact. They charged into the Roman lines, causing confusion and panic. The Roman soldiers had never faced such creatures before, and many broke ranks and fled. The Battle of the Trebia was a decisive victory for Hannibal. The Romans lost more than half their army, while Hannibal's losses were relatively light. The elephants had played a crucial role in the victory, but the harsh winter that followed took a further toll on these animals. Most of the remaining elephants died from disease and the cold. By the spring of 217 BC, Hannibal reportedly had only one elephant left, a massive beast that he used as his personal mount. This elephant, whose name, according to some sources, was Surus, meaning the Syrian, became a symbol of Hannibal's resilience. Despite the loss of most of his elephants, Hannibal continued his campaign with remarkable success. In the spring of 217 BC, he marched south through the Apennines and into Etruria. The Roman consul Gaius Flaminius pursued him with an army of about 30,000 men. Hannibal lured Flaminius into an ambush at Lake Trasimene. In one of the largest ambushes in military history, Hannibal's troops attacked the Roman army from the hills surrounding the lake. The Romans were trapped with the lake on one side and Hannibal's forces on the other. The battle was a massacre. The Romans lost nearly their entire army, including the consul Flaminius himself. Hannibal's tactical genius was on full display even without his elephants. He continued to outmaneuver and defeat the Romans. The loss of the elephants did not diminish his effectiveness as a commander. Instead, it forced him to rely even more on his strategic brilliance, his ability to read terrain, and his skill in managing a diverse army. The Roman Republic was plunged into crisis after the disaster at Lake Trasimene. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator. Fabius adopted a strategy of avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal. Instead, he harassed the Carthaginian army, attacked supply lines, and tried to wear Hannibal down through attrition. This approach became known as Fabian strategy, and it frustrated Hannibal, who wanted to force a decisive battle. However, the Roman public grew impatient with Fabius's cautious approach. They demanded action, and in 216 BC, the Romans assembled their largest army, yet approximately 80,000 men under the command of the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Hannibal had about 50,000 troops. The two armies met at Cannae in southern Italy on August 2, 216 BC. The Battle of Cannae is considered one of the greatest tactical masterpieces in military history. Hannibal arranged his army in a crescent formation, his weakest troops in the center and his strongest cavalry on the flanks. As the Romans advanced, they pushed back Hannibal's center. But this was part of his plan. The Carthaginian line bent, but did not break. Meanwhile, Hannibal's cavalry defeated the Roman cavalry, and then attacked the Roman infantry from behind. The Romans were surrounded on all sides in what is known as a double envelopment. The result was catastrophic for Rome. An estimated 50,000 to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed, including the consul Paulus. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Hannibal had achieved this victory through superior tactics and leadership, not through the use of elephants. The war elephants that had been such a dramatic part of his initial campaign were gone. But Hannibal's genius remained. After Cannae, many of Rome's allies in southern Italy defected to Hannibal. The city of Capua, one of the largest in Italy, opened its gates to him. Hannibal seemed poised to destroy the Roman Republic, but he faced a critical problem. He did not have the resources to besiege Rome itself. His army, though victorious, was far from home. Without reinforcements or a proper siege train, Hannibal could not take the heavily fortified city of Rome. The Romans, for their part, refused to surrender despite their losses. They raised new armies and continued the fight. They adopted the Fabian strategy of avoiding direct battle, and instead focused on cutting off Hannibal's supplies and attacking his allies. Hannibal remained in Italy 15 years, campaigning across the peninsula, but he was unable to deliver the final blow to Rome. The absence of his war elephants was symbolic of his larger predicament. He had achieved incredible victories, but he lacked the resources to finish what he had started. Meanwhile, Carthage was fighting on multiple fronts and could not send Hannibal the reinforcements he desperately needed. In 207 BC, Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal crossed the Alps with a new army and more elephants, intending to join forces with Hannibal. But Hasdrubal was intercepted and defeated by the Romans at the Battle of the Metaurus. Hannibal learned of his brother's death when the Romans threw Hasdrubal's severed head into his camp. This was a devastating blow, and Hannibal knew that his hopes of conquering Rome were fading. The war shifted to Africa. The Roman general Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, invaded North Africa and threatened Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled from Italy in 203 BC to defend his homeland. The final confrontation between Hannibal and Scipio came at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. Hannibal had assembled a new army, and he had war elephants once again. Approximately 80 elephants were deployed in the battle. Hannibal hoped that these creatures would break the Roman lines, as they had done years before at the Trebia. But Scipio had learned from previous encounters. He trained his men to create corridors through which the elephants could pass without causing damage. The Roman soldiers used horns and loud noises to frighten the elephants, and many of the creatures turned back and trampled Hannibal's own troops. The elephants that did reach the Roman lines were channeled through the gaps and dealt with by skirmishers. The Battle of Zama was a decisive defeat for Hannibal. Scipio's superior cavalry and disciplined infantry overwhelmed the Carthaginian forces. Hannibal was forced to flee, and Carthage sued for peace. The Second Punic War ended with a harsh treaty. Carthage was stripped of its empire, forced to pay enormous reparations, and forbidden from waging war without Roman permission. Hannibal survived and continued to serve Carthage as a statesman. But the Romans never forgot him. They pressured Carthage to hand him over, and eventually Hannibal fled into exile. He spent his final years moving from kingdom to kingdom, always one step ahead of Roman agents. In 183 BC, cornered by Roman forces in Bithynia in modern-day Turkey, Hannibal took poison rather than be captured. He reportedly said, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Hannibal's legacy is immense. He is remembered as one of the greatest military commanders in history. His use of war elephants, particularly during the crossing of the Alps, became legendary. The image of Hannibal leading his elephants through the snow-covered mountains has captured the imagination of people for over 2,000 years. The war elephants were more than just weapons. They were symbols of Hannibal's audacity and his willingness to attempt the impossible. They represented the exotic and the terrifying, and they played a crucial role in his early victories. Even though most of them perished, their impact on the war and on history was profound. The bold move of bringing elephants across the Alps shook the Roman Republic to its core. It demonstrated that Rome was not invincible, and that its enemies were capable of extraordinary feats. The psychological effect of the elephants, combined with Hannibal's tactical brilliance, created a crisis that Rome barely survived. Hannibal's war elephants also influenced military thinking. For centuries, commanders studied his tactics, and the use of elephants in warfare continued in various parts of the world for many years. The story of Hannibal and his elephants became a symbol of daring innovation and the willingness to take risks in pursuit of victory. In many ways, Hannibal's campaign was a testament to the power of leadership, vision, and determination. He faced enormous obstacles, including hostile terrain, harsh weather, enemy armies, and logistical challenges, yet he persevered and came closer than anyone else to destroying the Roman Republic. His war elephants, though they suffered and most died, were an integral part of that extraordinary effort. Today, Hannibal Barca is studied in military academies around the world, his strategies, particularly the double envelopment at Cannae, are considered masterpieces of tactical warfare. His crossing of the Alps with elephants remains one of the most dramatic episodes in military history. A feat that seemed impossible yet was accomplished through sheer will and ingenuity. The war elephants of Hannibal were not just animals, they were instruments of war, symbols of power, and agents of psychological terror. They played a key role in some of the most important battles of the Second Punic War, and their presence on the battlefield changed the course of history. The bold move of bringing them across the Alps was a gamble that paid off in the short term, even though Hannibal ultimately lost the war. Hannibal's story is also a reminder of the costs of war. The elephants suffered greatly during the campaign, and most of them died far from their homes in harsh and unfamiliar conditions. The soldiers who followed Hannibal also endured tremendous hardships. Many never returned to their families. The war devastated Italy and North Africa, leaving scars that lasted for generations. Yet despite the suffering and the ultimate defeat, Hannibal's legacy endures. He is remembered not as a villain, but as a hero, a man who dared to challenge the mightiest empire of his time. His war elephants are remembered as symbols of that challenge, a bold move that shook the Roman Republic and changed the course of history. The image of Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants has inspired countless works of art, literature, and film. It represents the triumph of human ambition over natural obstacles, the willingness to take risks, and the courage to face overwhelming odds. These are timeless themes that continue to resonate with people today. In conclusion, Hannibal's war elephants were a bold and innovative element of his military strategy. Their use in the invasion of Italy, particularly during the crossing of the Alps, was a dramatic and unprecedented move that shocked the Roman Republic. The elephants played a crucial role in Hannibal's early victories, instilling fear and chaos among Roman soldiers. Even though most of the elephants perished during the campaign, their impact on the war and on history was significant. Hannibal himself remains one of the greatest military minds in history, and his story continues to fascinate and inspire people around the world. The war elephants were more than just tools of war. They were symbols of Hannibal's audacity, his genius, and his determination to challenge Rome. They represent a moment in history when one man and his army dared to do the impossible, and in doing so changed the world forever.